So, today we're going to be talking about goal setting at your internship. Initially, we wanted to talk about goal setting in general, but I thought it would be more interesting if we spoke about it in a professional context. So, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and their continuing connection to our community. We pay respect to them, their culture, and to their elders, past and present. As many of us are watching in locations all around Australia and New Zealand, I would also like to pay our respects to the traditional owners of the country on which we all live and work. I would also like to recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, and community and pay our respects to them and their culture and to elders, both past, present, and future. So, for today's session, I'll be hosting alongside Muzzy, and we're both interns. I'm a security cloud solutions architect intern, and Muzzy, who'll be dropping in soon, is an app innovation specialist intern. So, the agenda for today, we'll start with a few MSA reminders. We'll then talk about goal setting at your internship, and we'll finish off with a Q&A. I also want to do a preface to this meeting, which is that we're currently in the process of timelining future sessions for MSA meetups. So if you have any ideas for what you'd like to see in the meetups going forward, please do feel free to share in the chat or come off mute and have a chat with me at the end. I'd love to know what you would find most useful to get out of these sessions. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to point out is that you can be a Microsoft Learn student ambassador by following this link on the page. So please do so if you are interested. And as you can see, there's a bunch of resources that are on the Microsoft website for students. You can visit the Student Hub, and you can also access a bunch of free Azure resources for students. So follow the link to do so if you are interested. And there's even more free resources you can access as a student. I personally have used the GitHub Student Developer Pack and Azure for Students. It's really good for if you're trying to learn something new and you want to learn how to use these technologies. So if you are interested, I would highly recommend. Michelle, who usually runs this call, also has a YouTube channel. And there's actually a playlist of all the previous MSA sessions that have been recorded. So check out Michelle's YouTube channel and the past recordings. And yeah, there's the playlist link if you want to go directly to that. There's also a Microsoft student newsletter. It's not just a student newsletter, but it's good for students to access. You can access it through the QR code or the link on the page. You'll be able to see the latest articles, documentation, and events. You do also get a curated monthly developer newsletter, which is quite good. It'll point out opportunities to connect with other developers and training materials and courses for learning and upskilling. You can also keep up to date with what the MSA is doing via Facebook and LinkedIn groups. So please scan the QR code to do so. In Melbourne, we do have a meetup coming up next week, which will be on Wednesday at the Microsoft Melbourne office. So if you're interested, would love to see you there. And these are some of our upcoming events. Having gone through the introductory content, I'll get started with the presentation for today. And what I thought I'd talk about is goal setting at your internship. So, when I think of goal setting at my internship, there's sort of five main areas that I think about in terms of things I want to get out of my internship or things I want to do better. The first one is, as many of you can imagine, technical upskilling. Um, and so for me, what that looks like is because I'm in the cybersecurity team, learning some of that security content, finding something specific that I want to get better at, and then doing the relevant training to be able to do that. There's a lot of networking that I've been doing in my role as well, and it's mostly for me to get to know the other people at Microsoft, learn what the different roles are, and also just learn from the people I'm meeting and have those relationships. So I'll talk about that more as well. I'll also talk about becoming a productive team member. And the other thing that's really important to me as well is identifying what my interests are and how I want to build upon them going forward. So I'll talk about that, and I'll finish off by talking about developing industry awareness. I feel like this is something that, as a student at university, I didn't think about a whole heap, but during my internship, it's been pretty critical, and so I'll touch on that as well. Before I go into specific examples and things like that, um, I wanted to ask out of curiosity, um, how many people here have done an internship before or worked in a professional environment? Oh, okay, okay. It's just good to know so I can tailor what I'm saying. So, in terms of technical upskilling, um, there's a sort of a few main things to consider. Um, I think the first thing is that once you've started working, you'll realize that you've been put onto a project or having to do a task that requires you to be able to do certain things that you probably haven't done before. This is a really good opportunity for you to learn that thing. So, in terms of technical upskilling, that might look like learning a new programming language or a framework. For me, it meant, like I was touching on earlier, doing a lot of the cybersecurity training. And the way my manager sort of guided me in terms of my internship to do the training is um, what he called a T model, where when you start learning, you're focusing on your breadth of knowledge, you're getting a high level overview. And then once you've gotten that, you start specializing in something. And that's when you narrow down. So it's a bit like a T shape. And I think that really helped me because I was able to develop context to attach my more specific knowledge to. So that is one of the things that you might want to do. Other things you might want to do include completing some kind of a technical certification or course, and also developing and deploying a personal project. I'll touch on both of these. In terms of doing a technical certification or course during your internship, I think it's a really good idea. And there's three main reasons why. Firstly, of course, it's great learning, but also besides that, you'd have something to show for yourself in terms of, as opposed to just saying, "Oh, now I can, do code in this programming language I couldn't before." When you've done your certification, you have something more concrete to say, to demonstrate how you have grown. And that can be a really good thing to have in terms of any performance reviews you may have. Um, And also, in terms of developing and deploying a personal project, I have a really interesting story to share about this. It's not actually about me, but it's about a friend from university who she did an internship at Commonwealth Bank. And she did a project there where, when she realized that what would happen is a lot of her colleagues would go searching for some resource and they'd struggle to find it. And this happened a number of times to the point where she went, this is just slowing down my team's work. It reflects inefficient processes. So I'm going to do something about it. And she made sort of an inventory of resources, and it was actually an application where you can input, enters details about your role, what it is you're looking for, and it will output relevant resources based on that information. So that was really good. And she learned a lot by doing that, even though it wasn't the project she was put on. And she was really able to help out her team. Um, so that's something to consider as well. In general, when you're doing your internship, it's nice to have that consideration of what it is you can do to help your team grow. And in terms of technical upskilling, there's a few other things I want to say. Um, it's in when you're thinking about what skills you want to upskill in, there's two main considerations, I guess, what you're interested in and also what your team needs. So I highly recommend having a chat with your team members, with your supervisor to figure out what that is and upskilling in that area so you can become a more helpful team member. Um, yeah, that's all the things about technical upskilling. The next thing I wanted to talk about is networking. This is personally something I found very nerve-wracking when I started my internship because I feel like I've always been on the more introverted side. But I challenged myself to do this more, and I think it has really helped. So it's all good and well to say networking, you should do it, but how do you do that? And how do you do it in a meaningful way? So for me, it started with just setting up catch ups with colleagues in my team. So on my first day at work, I met a few of them, and then at team wide meetings, I met more of them. I set up catch ups with some of them to introduce myself, to learn more about them, to learn more about their role, and I asked them who else they think I should meet at Microsoft. And this was really good because once they'd tell me, I automatically sort of had a list of people to go and talk to. It sort of feeds itself. Once you talk to some people, they tell you about other people, and then this is something you can just keep doing. So that's really, really good. Something I found particularly useful is if I had a burning question about anything. I'll give you an example. So, a few weeks ago, I read a series of posts on LinkedIn about whether cybersecurity professionals need to have experience working at help desk or some other sort of IT admin job before they become an analyst. And this was really sort of interesting to me because it's not something I had read before. So when I was doing these catch-ups, I asked a few different people what they thought of that. And I got to hear a range of different perspectives. And this was really good for me because now I had this more diverse perspective than what I had just read online. So that's something that I would strongly recommend you do in your networking. And when you meet people, connect with them on professional platforms. And of course, attending industry events and meetups is a really good experience too, in terms of meeting people who you aren't working with directly and getting a broader picture of what's happening in your industry. I can see that Muzzy's here now. Do you want to do an intro?
Yes, perfect. Thank you here as well. Yeah, my name's Muzzy. I'm an app innovation specialist intern in that team. Yeah, I'm part of the MSA like Afia as well, and so I'll be here. I'll be talking a little bit later on in the presentation. I'll be doing an example. But yeah, it's a bit of introduction on myself. It's nice to have everyone here as well.
Thanks for the intro. I'll keep going with the presentation. The next thing I wanted to talk about is becoming a productive team member. So I think that besides the technical upskilling, there's also a lot to be said about getting to know how your team works, getting to know how the dynamic is in your team to be able to relate more and then be able to work productively with them. So, how do you do that? Um, I think that part of it is getting to know your colleagues. And when you're doing your networking and having catch ups with people, you can sort of ask them about how they view the team, what their favorite things are about working in this team. What do they think the team can do better? What are their goals in the coming year? All of these questions will give you an insight into how the team has historically operated and plans to operate going forward. So that's something you can do. But besides asking these questions, another place you can just sort of observe this is by participating in meetings, both formal and informal. The reason I say this is because personally, especially when I joined at the start, I felt pretty shy to contribute in meetings, and it's because I wasn't always confident that I had anything super meaningful to offer. But that's something that I had to overcome because by not contributing, I was missing out. And I think the reality is that initially it may be true that um, you may not have something super meaningful to offer because you're learning, but you always have your perspective, and that's always valuable. And even if you're not saying something super meaningful, you can get feedback on it, and getting that feedback sooner rather than later is always better. So you can improve going forward. I would also encourage you to proactively seek feedback and act on it. Whether that be from your manager, whether that be from your team members, I'd encourage you to maybe get feedback from both. I think that getting the feedback and acting on it is probably the number one way to improve because then you're not guessing in terms of how your performance is going anymore. The other thing I will say though is that with feedback, I found that it's really varied in terms of the work experiences I've had so far. So, for example, at the last placement I did, feedback was quite formalized. Um, and I was expected to be asking for and acting on formal feedback pretty much week to week. I had catch ups with my supervisor, and every subsequent week I was supposed to demonstrate how I had acted on his feedback. But here I have found that it's not as formalized. There have even been occasions where I asked for feedback and I've actually gotten the question in return, well, how do you think you went? And this was a new experience for me. And what I learned from it is that it's also as important as it is to get feedback, it's also important to be confident in your own judgment of how you're doing. So be comfortable having your own opinions and doing your own self-assessments. I think your gut feeling often does tell you a lot about how you're going. So don't doubt yourself. I also want to talk about identifying your interests. I feel like technology is so broad and there's so many different things you could do, and I always felt like so much of it is so exciting, and I don't quite know what to do. So, how do you carve out your interests? I think one of the first things you can do at your internship is try to get involved in different projects. Obviously, you only have so much time, so there is only so much you can do. But even within that, if you have a main project, maybe you can shadow some meetings for another one. Maybe you can ask your supervisor what else is going on in the team, so you at least have the awareness. By being exposed to more things rather than less, um, you will at least have sampled different things that you can now consider, which before you hadn't. I'd always not always, I want to say. I also want to encourage you to have regular check ins with a mentor. Your mentor doesn't have to be your manager or supervisor, it can be someone else in the team who you trust and connect with. Um, this can be really useful because now you have a dedicated person to talk to about what your goals are, where you want to go, and what your interests are, and then their job is to help you seek out opportunities to pursue those things. So having a dedicated person to speak to can really help. And I'd also encourage you to network with people from a wide variety of roles. Um, this is really helpful again in getting that exposure and seeing what different things are available to you, especially if you can shadow people in a wide variety of roles that can again bolster your exposure. And you know a lot more of what's going on in your organization. I want to quickly make a point here that depending on the internship you're doing, though I would suspect a lot of the time, you're quite likely to have some downtime in your internship where you don't have dedicated work to do. So if you're working 40 hours a week, maybe you only really have 25 hours of project work, and then you have this 15 hours just sitting there. Well, how can you make the most of your time? Um, and I would say there's a series of things you can do. Use that time to learn, use that time to get this varied exposure that will help you to identify your interest. Use this time also to, what else have I done? Use this time to network effectively, use this time to reflect. Um, Something that I took quite seriously, which I feel like a few of my peers didn't, though that's not necessarily a bad thing because I think reflection is personal, is I did a 6-month full-time placement last year organized through my university, and they required us to have a daily journal describing what we did, what we learned from it, and I did it in quite a lot of detail, so it was super fascinating for me to look back on. But the benefit of it was um, when I had downtime, that is something I could do. And it's not like I was spending 15 hours a week doing that. That would be extremely overboard. But it meant that maybe I did it for an hour, and that hour helped me to plan out the other things I could do. So that was very useful. So formalizing reflection could be something that helps you. It's something you can consider. And lastly, yep,
Yeah, I just had a point on the last slide that I think would be good. Just going back to um, like identifying interests and networking with a range of people. It's pretty common that throughout your professional career, when you're working on a project, it's rarely ever just going to be your team as well. It's very likely that you're going to have to tap into the skills of other teams. And so if you already have a connection or network there or an introduction, it makes it much easier to work with other teams.
that's very true. Okay. Um, yeah, the last thing I'll quickly touch on is developing your industry awareness. How do you actually do that? What even is industry awareness? There's a few things I would suggest. Firstly, you can read about what's going on in your industry in the news. You can read about it on LinkedIn. You can subscribe to newsletters by key thinkers or players in your field. That can help, and you can curate your news so it comes straight to you and you don't need to go looking for it. The other thing I would suggest, which I have found very useful, is if you're in the office, going to the office early, or even if you just have meetings, going to your meetings early, because often you'll get to hear other people talking about what they're working on or what their concerns are. And this is such a great time to organically have these conversations about what's actually going on in the industry, in the company, by people who are directly affected by it. So this is taking your reading a step further and really seeing what the impact of it is. And I would also suggest, if you can, to shadow customer meetings as much as you can, because again, you get a more varied perspective. And I want to finish off with a quick tip. If you're looking for places to do your reading, you can always ask your colleagues for recommendations rather than having to do the search on your own. I quickly wanted to show you that this is a roadmap I made for my internship. It's something that I regularly refine. It might be a little hard to read, but I hope you can read the bold text. The point is that I looked at the months I had, I looked at what are all the main things that my manager indicated would be good for me to do, what are the things that I want to do. And I try to plan out what I can in the time that I have. And this is how I did my goal setting. As you can see, there's a lot of blanks, and this is a continual development process in terms of figuring it out. And there's things I'm constantly refining, but this is a really useful guide for me because you will find most likely when you start your internship that you may want a timeline for how it's supposed to go, but it's not coming. You're probably not going to have one because the workplace is very variable. So setting up my own helped me have some of that structure. And I think Muzi has a good example to talk about as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to walk through an example that I did for goal setting. And the reason I like this example in particular is that I could actually practice it without being at work. So it doesn't require me to be at work just to practice it. Obviously, work and internship is a great way to practice this and where I can use it the most. But it was around improving public speaking skills. And so there's a pretty popular framework in goal setting, which is the SMART framework, which is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And so, yeah, this goal was improve public speaking skills. In particular, so being specific here, I want to improve my vocal delivery when giving presentations. And how I was going to measure this was I was going to participate in 2 presentations per week. Now, 2 presentations per week, that might sound a bit daunting. Like, I'm not going to have 2 full-on presentations with a whole room of people. But I took every opportunity I could in what I had available. So at university, right, like even if we had group assignments, having like a more formal weekly catch up for the group assignment. For my extracurriculars as part of a society where I run a podcast. And so we'll do that like every fortnight. So that could be one of the things that's involved. And you'll find that, when you're doing these like 2 per week, that's, 8 a month pretty much. And so it really starts to compound over time. And so I just want to emphasize it's not necessary to start doing it at work. You kind of start doing some of these goals before you enter the workforce. And so why is that relevant? Well, for me at work, improving it will obviously allow me to effectively deliver the key message in the presentation, build confidence in the person that's listening to it. And just time bound, I wanted to achieve this within 6 months. So have a really specific time. I think everyone's kind of been in the same experience. You've set a really like ambitious goal before, and then you're like, all right, sweet, very motivated at the start. A week goes by, still motivated, and then you don't really have any way to measure it. You haven't really thought of the process of how I'm actually going to get this goal to come to real life. So having a time bound, like a measurable time that you can do it in is really important. And then one final tip, I know Afia kind of mentioned it earlier around feedback, but it's really good to have a feedback loop in place. And so I'll go through an example with my one. So in practice, I might do a presentation, then I'll monitor it. So either I can maybe, one method for this could be like recording it and then rewatching it myself, or I could have someone else in, like Afia mentioned, maybe a mentor place. And then so analyze it, see what went well, what could be improved, and then adjust. And then you can just kind of keep repeating that. And this would definitely have like a massive improvement in the long term. So we're just going to compound over and over again. So yeah, definitely try. I really recommend, after this workshop, just look at one of the goals that's been kind of sitting in the back of your mind, maybe try putting it in this framework. Yeah, that's me for public speaking. And any
Thank you for that.
questions?
Yeah. Yep, Kevin?
Thanks for that presentation. So earlier you said something about having like a T-shaped skill, and basically finding something to like, I guess, specialize in. Do you feel like do you feel like that speciality skill was something that you picked, or was it more something that, oh, I'm a cloud security specialist, this is going to be my speciality now? And I guess the other question would be, is your speciality where you're at the moment, is that where you thought or envisioned you wanted, or is it something that maybe later on you may want to specialize in something else?
Could you elaborate on your first question a bit more?
Basically, you said in your presentation that you've developed a T skill. Is that correct? Do you feel like that skill that you have now, the specialized skill, is that like through the internship, like, oh, I'm doing this work, therefore this is my speciality, or was it something that you picked and then it just ended up being developed through this internship? I guess my
Um,
question is, did you end up like, is this where you want to be specialized in, or is it you've got this role, therefore this is my specialization?
okay, I get what you mean. Um, that's a very good question.
Because
I
when
think
for
that,
example,
yeah,
for me, trying to get like into the IT industry, I feel like whatever I end up like my first job basically is going to be, at least in my head, what I guess I will be specializing in. Um, but I don't feel like that's necessarily like the right mindset. So I'm not sure if you had that mindset.
I get what you mean. I think that the two things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive in terms of this is where I want to be, so I went there, and this is what incidentally I came across at work, and now I'm sort of here. I can actually give you an example of this. So, in my past placement through my university that I was talking about, I had a small project where I was doing a bit of research into Purview. And that was really just something I did for 2, 3 weeks. I wasn't even working with Purview, just reading about what it did and reporting on it. But interestingly, that was one of my favorite things I did in that placement. I enjoyed it so much. I thought it was so interesting. Um, but then I hadn't really thought about it much going further because it wasn't my main project. I didn't really have a reason to think about it. And then I started this internship and I had the opportunity to work with Purview again. And that T model I was talking about, it's just a way I think people at Microsoft and maybe beyond too, though I haven't heard of it beyond, think about learning, I guess, in terms of. So what I was trying to say is because I'm new to security and security is huge. So I start off with getting a bit of high level understanding of everything. So what is data security? What is application security? What is a theme? What is endpoint detection? I just look at what all of these things are, and then I identified, okay, I'm most interested in data security. Now I'm going to go and learn about that. So am I doing that because it's something I have to do for work? Um, Absolutely I am, but also I fortunately, in the way it worked out, it was something that I was actually interested in already, and I was lucky to be able to pursue that. So it's a bit of both. Muzi, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, definitely. I think early on in your career, you should always remember that you are early in your career. Like you haven't fully specialized, you haven't done 15 years in one particular area. And this kind of period in your professional life is really for exploring. You got to find what you like. If you were to just say, the thing you think of right now is let's say there's one field you wanted to get into. If you think that's the only path you like and you're going to specialize in this forever, you're going to miss out on so many opportunities to try out other different areas, which you don't know if you like or dislike because you wouldn't have tried them in the first place. So that's a big emphasis that I've heard as well, and I try to incorporate is just actually just trying things out. I don't think you should like confine yourself to one area, and you always have some extra time to explore different areas. And I don't think it's ever a waste of time to go explore other areas because you never know it's going to be useful to the work you're doing. So please don't confine yourself. Definitely just try to explore as many options as you can. And then I feel like later on in your early career, then you kind of, after like trying out a bunch of things, you're like, you know what, I like this particular thing a little bit more. You specialize in it. I think that's the kind of pathway you should be aiming for.
And
Thanks for
I
that.
reckon, sorry, yep, I just wanted to quickly say, I would also add to Mudi's point that something I read that I found really interesting and helpful for me to think about is that when we're trying to learn something new or just do something new in our lives, it's useful to see how we can incorporate it into the things we already do as opposed to taking on something new. So let's just say we talk about the scenario you mentioned, Kevin, where you started a job in some particular IT field, and then a few months in or a few years later, you're like, oh no, I want to do this other thing instead. Um, and it's not what your role offers you. Rather than feeling like I need to make that job shift immediately for me to be getting that experience, you could look into incorporating some of those practices in your day to day. And I read this in the context of security. So it was talking about making a career change to security. And if you want to do that, there's no reason you can't start taking that initiative in your own IT teams without being a security professional, in some small ways for you to get the exposure. So I think that's an interesting way to think about it as well.
And just on Sam's got a question in the chat about working more on his reflection and either sharing it or doing it publicly. My thoughts on that would be, and it's kind of building off what Afia says, so I'm sure she'll have some words after me. But no, really good initiative to start doing that. And I think it'd also be really good to find a mentor. I think mentors can be some of the best for doing this because it's a one-on-one relationship where over time they'll also kind of get to know you and what you're doing. So I definitely recommend getting a mentor to do that. Obviously, there's you on like the personal side, you doing it, reflecting it yourself personally. That doesn't always have to be shared with your mentor. And then see another one where you can kind of constantly check in and improve with your mentor. What do you think, Althea?
I totally agree with what you just said. I think if you are looking for sort of an accountability buddy or someone to share it with, definitely having a mentor is a great place to be able to share that. But it doesn't even have to be a mentor necessarily, even if you just have a friend and you both have a common interest, or you don't even necessarily need to have that common interest. Just someone, I guess, who you trust, who you know has your best interests at heart, you can share that sort of discussion with. Yeah, if that's something you want to do, I'd highly encourage it.
Oh, and also, I don't know about other universities, but I know my university has like a career mentoring. You can kind of get like a mentor there as well if you guys are struggling to find someone to kind of talk to about maybe on a professional kind of scale. I don't know, Alfia, was that at your university as well? Did you guys have something similar?
I've got no idea. I've never heard of that. That's so cool. I hope we do.
Yeah, I'm sure like most unis do have it to some extent. So I mean, if they do, I mean, it doesn't hurt to just search up and see if they have like a bit of a program, or even in some of the societies as well. There was like mentoring programs. So I think it's good to spend like maybe 30 minutes to go like research what's available, because sometimes you hear like, oh, I need to get a mentor, and you're like, well, where am I going to find this mentor? Where am I going to find someone that's going to hear me? And then, you know, sometimes there's already like programs in place. So definitely have a look out for any of those available.
Yeah. It could also be a more senior student, maybe who's had some more work experience, and then they can share their insights.
Definitely. Well, it is getting to 11:15. Do we want to wrap it up now, Afia?
Yeah, sounds good. Any last
Okay.
questions from anyone? Nope. Well, thank you all so much for coming, and hopefully we will see you next month.
Perfect. And also next month we're running the session on industry trends. I don't know if you mentioned that earlier, Afia. But we're doing that, so make sure everyone joins through. But we'll see you guys next month.
See ya.
Perfect.